This video is not about running. It's about summer of 1983. I spent the summer with my friend John and Fia in London, and ultimately we went to Greece. But initially we were studying architecture, and we took the summer to go and try and find work in an architect's office in the UK. There wasn't much work in Ireland back then. And so we did whatever we did. We got the boat to England. There was no Ryanair. So we got the boat to England and we arrived. Fia ultimately ended up working in some place where he was designing the layouts of cold storage rooms. Not cutting edge architecture. I ended up in a McDonald's. John, I don't know where John ended up, but I know where he started. Now, back in those days, the kind of jobs you wanted to get or would get would be in an architect's office where you would be doing work on tracing paper. So you had a sort of semi-transparent paper that you would draw on, and you would trace over things, and you would draw with black lines with pens, and then those would be put through a process and turned into blueprints. That's effectively the kind of what a lot of architectural assistants or young people did. People who were starting out into an office. And those were the kinds of jobs we were looking for. And John saw this ad in the Evening Standard, the local newspaper, evening newspaper. Tracers wanted. So he goes, "Ooh, great." And John is an enthusiastic and very honest man. He watches these videos, I think. Anyway, John sees this thing and he rings up, and he's a great guy. He's very earnest. So he rings up. He says, "Oh, hello. I saw your name. I saw your ad in the newspaper. My name is John. I'm an architecture student from Ireland, and I've worked in my brother-in-law's office. He's an architect's office, and I've worked in there doing tracing of various drawings. And I'm hardworking. I'm diligent. I've got good grades at college, and I'm very interested in the opportunity of working for you in your tracing project." This one says, pauses. "Thank you very much, John, but how are you going to find my long-lost brother who I haven't seen in 40 years? Anyway, that's what happened to John. I'm not sure what he worked on, but he clearly didn't get that particular commission. I ended up flipping burgers in McDonald's, and I really enjoyed it. I just didn't manage to get a job in an architect's office, and I quite enjoyed the flipping the burgers. And after a while, I got promoted from the spotty chef stations to the where you'd break out to the front of house personnel where you'd be serving. And I enjoyed that for the most part. But I remember a guy came in one day, and most people are really polite, but this guy came in and he said, "Orange." Now in McDonald's you're taught to upsell, so you sit all the time. So you go, "Will that be large orange, sir?" And he goes, "32p orange." So you go, okay, so you get a small orange, and now at that stage, McDonald's were serving things the same way they serve them now, in plastic lid, straw. I think they still serve with straws, but anyway, there was these little crosshairs, but they weren't very well cut through. There was a batch and a not great batch, and he couldn't get the straw through. So he says to me, "Change the lid." So I, changes the lid, give it back to him. And the next one was also, but he can't get it through. And he says, "You didn't change the lid." And I said, "I'm terribly sorry, sir, but you must be very weak." He goes mad. He goes berserk. "What did you say?" I said, "Have a nice day, sir. Enjoy your orange." He went mad. Anyway, he wasn't best pleased. But it was a great summer. We also had this thing where we were the busiest McDonald's in the UK, serving I don't know how many thousands of. I think we served 1,000 Big Macs every lunchtime, and it was like really busy. But directly across the street was the headquarters in London of Coca-Cola, and McDonald's for some reason decided they'd sell McDonald's Cola instead of Coca-Cola for this particular year. And every single person who came in and said, "I'll have a Coke and a Big Mac" or whatever, you'd have to say, "I'm sorry, sir, we serve McDonald's Cola," because otherwise there'd be a big lawsuit. So this was every day. "I'm sorry, sir, we serve McDonald's Cola." Yeah, whatever. Anyway, the summer rolled along, and it was decided that we would go on holiday. Me, Fia, and John were going on holiday together. What could go wrong? And it was decided that because I was working in McDonald's, I would be free during the day. I worked in the afternoons and evenings, to go and look at travel agents and book a holiday. And there was no mobile phones, so contacting people was sort of difficult. And I remember I went to the student holiday place. I think it was called SDI. Anyways, a student holiday travel company, and I was somehow authorized to get a ticket for Fia and I. We could book for the two of us, but John had to do some checking back home, and so he said, "Well, you get 2 tickets, and then I'll just turn up tomorrow and I'll get a third ticket." But it turned out that the following day the tickets were sold out, and you had to get a slightly different way. So that was kind of what was going to happen. So we went, and we were going to go to a place called Monganisi, I think it was called, and it was on an island called Paxos, which was off Corfu in Greece. Well, we had been promised by Fia's now brother-in-law, we'd been promised that it would be full of girls. It'd be wall-to-wall girls. The words shooting, fish and barrel were mentioned. So, of course, we thought, oh, fantastic. That's where we're going. John goes to the airport. So it turns out that he is on a completely separate way of getting to Corfu. That's okay. We'll fly. We'll meet in Corfu. And so John goes, and he says his flight is Saturday night. So he was right about 2 things. His flight was on Saturday, and it was in the night. It wasn't Saturday night. It was Friday night, Saturday morning. So he heads out to the airport and comes back very angry a couple of hours later because he's missed his flight because he's gone out Saturday night thinking it's Saturday night, Sunday morning, but it's actually Saturday, but it's Friday night, Saturday morning, early. He comes back, and then it turns out that his other problem is that they only do fly once a week to Corfu, and they can only fly him out the following week. So Fia and I say goodbye, see you in Monganisi. We head off on Monarch Airlines. So Fia and I head off to Corfu, and we get the boat down to Paxos, and we head out. Now, our trip was going to be funded by money we'd earned in the summer. We'd earned money in the summer. But for some reason, we needed traveller's checks. There was no euro, there's no credit cards. There were credit cards, we didn't have any. And we made some agreement that Fia was going to get all the traveller's checks. That was the plan. He was going to get traveller's checks for me, and I can't remember how I was going to pay him back. But anyway, it was going to be some sort of plan like that. We get to the island. John's not there. And it turns out that Fia has somehow didn't get all the traveller's checks. He was relying on John to get some. So the net result is we arrive with almost no money on the island of Paxos. And there was so little we could do all day. We could for breakfast, we bought some sort of cheap hard biscuits and a can of Coke. And then we couldn't afford to eat anything else during the day. And at night we could have the cheapest chicken dish on the menu and a beer, 1 beer. That was how we survived. And it turned out, ironically enough, Fia was training for a marathon. So we couldn't eat till very late in the evening because he had to do his training, and then we'd eat after his training. And then, but John and I we didn't do anything. So we just, I don't know, we didn't do any, we sort of exercised by walking, I suppose. Now, John and I have run many marathons. Fia hasn't run in decades. However, we had Dan and Fia and I, we had so little money. So I remember we were out walking one day. And so we just walk around the island for the day, because and a taxi driver stopped and offered us a lift back to town, and we said, no, it's okay. He said, no, it's free. I'll bring you. And we said, we've nothing to do when we get there. So we walked back, and I suppose we must have eaten local grapes or stolen fruit or something. I don't know. I can't remember what we did during the day, but it was an example of the kind of generosity that I've experienced in my limited time in Greece, both in Athens and in Corfu. And then we went on. I remember we tried to stay in various places, move around, and with no success in any particular way. But it was a guy who'd come back from London, and he was setting up a sort of campsite, and he built a sort of things that people were going to stay in. We didn't have tents or anything. But he said, look, you guys, I don't know how we met him, but he said, look, you're welcome to stay here for almost no money. I can't remember, it was really cheap. He more or less said you could stay there. And we stayed in a sort of, it was indoors, it was a sort of room with a stone floor. But there was a pool, and it was really, really very nice. And there was places we could make our own food, and it was really very nice. It was very nice of him, and we had that was really nice. We stayed there, and we never saw. John? Where's John? So all over the week had passed, and we again, we'd no mobile phones, so we think, where's John? He never showed. He never saw him anywhere until the last day. We're wandering through Corfu, and we see John. And what happened? What happened? So it turned out he had flown. So he flies out a week late. He flies out a week late. And he thinks, oh, I've lost time. And he arrives on a Sunday. And it turns out that ferries don't go to Paxos on a Sunday. So he sees there's an excursion on this. You can go out on an excursion of boat, and they'll go to Paxos, and then they'll have a barbecue, and then they'll come back to Corfu. And he thinks, I'll do that. I just won't go for the return leg. So he pays a lot of money to go on, because he's going on a cruise rather than on a ferry. So he goes on his cruise. Turns out the weather is bad, and they divert to another island. And he doesn't get to go to Paxos at all. He ends up on some other island having his barbecue, and ends up right back where he started in Corfu. Some people have all the luck. And it was just, that was the kind of way it was. And meanwhile, Fia and I had access to very little money. My dad had promised, I'd met my dad at the airport before I went out, and he'd said to me, look, here, have some money. And I stupidly, because it was my first real summer job, I suppose, or my second real summer, I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet, and I had said, no, it's okay. And so when we arrived on the island, and Fia had thought that John was bringing the traveller's checks, I was deeply regretting not taking my dad up on his offer. But so we had a very frugal time of it in Corfu, but people were great to us. People, it was really an enjoyable stay for all of the fun. And you always remember the sort of the times when things don't go well. You never remember the times your luggage arrived. You remember the times your luggage didn't arrive. It's happened to me many times. But yeah, I remember that. And then one thing struck me, you can have all the sort of diversity, but we were in Athens and went to a restaurant, and it's kind of, this guy started talking to me, who I assume was the owner, and he was talking about living in Chicago I think in the 1950s, or his dad lived in Chicago, had a restaurant in the 1950s, and it was burnt out by the Irish mob. He was telling me this as I'm eating my dinner, and I of course apologise profusely. But John Marie, and he says, oh no, it was great. He said, we got loads of insurance money, and we got to come home to Athens and set up a restaurant. So there's always, always look on the bright side of life. Stuff will go wrong. You'll end up on the wrong island, having got on the wrong flight, or missed your first flight. You lose all these kinds of things, but amazing memories, just like I had when I visited Athens. So I've only really been to Greece for about 3 weeks in total, but I really enjoyed it. I remember when I was there, being asked what I thought of Athens, and you just arrived, so you think, what am I going to say about Athens? And I said it was a bit like Rome. It reminded me of Rome. I mean, it's got ruins, it's got modern city, all this kind of stuff. I don't think that went down very well. I don't think that's the kind of thing you say to somebody from Greece. But after a while, I realised it's Athens and Greece, they're very different. It's so much less frantic than Rome. It was very relaxed. People were very relaxed. When you'd go to the tourist shops, stuff was relatively cheap. I mean, Ireland's expensive, but things were very cheap. And people were, there was no one was pushing anything on you. You could just go in like you do to a normal shop, and it was very relaxing, and people were very willing to talk. The guy whose restaurant's telling me about being burnt out by the Irish mob. But yeah, I had a great time in Greece at the Athens Marathon. People were so kind to me, and in all sorts of levels. And it was a very relaxing, very enjoyable, very nice place to be. So yeah, see you further on down the road. And of course, there were no women in Monganesi. Fia.